Welcome back to Vinyl Friday, where I go through my records in alphabetical order like a big nerd and talk about why I love them. About a year ago, a friend of a very good friend gifted me a beautiful record player in exchange for some very high quality sausages. I drove for about 4 hours to pick it up, and that night I decided to listen to every single album in my collection alphabetically, to reacquaint myself and to make sure that the machine got the mileage that it deserved. I also made a spur of the moment decision to make a little video of my favorite thing about the first album on the list. I'm going to play that video in its entirety because it's only about a minute long. Hello my fine folk, and welcome to a new segment that I'm going to be calling a Vinyl Friday, in which I go through my record collection and share with you the moments I like most about my records. I'm doing this because I recently acquired this beautiful machine from a friend of a very good friend. And so today's album, the first album, is Life Beyond LA by Ambrosia, who used to be a prog band, but by 1978 were a smooth rock band. And here comes my favorite moment. Get ready. It's the melancholy. That's my favorite part of this track. According to my calendar, this delightful nonsense has been going on for exactly a year. In addition, this humble channel is nearing 1,000 subscribers. Because of these two things, we're doing a very special Q&A episode. I'm your host, Fathom. I'm Fathom, the piano correspondent. I'm Fathom and I play the bass. I'm Internetsy. You submitted such thoughtful, interesting questions that we didn't want to leave any out, so we'll be releasing this in 2 parts. Let's begin with some questions about other musicians. If you could have a jam session with either Steely Dan or the Beatles, who would you go with? That's easy, Steely Dan. Yeah, but Steely Dan was always very particular about the quality of session musicians that they brought in. You'd have to be really, really good. Yeah, but the Beatles seem to be super distractible. I feel like your sessions would just descend into this nostalgia-fueled rock and roll songs from your childhood extended jam. To be honest, as a bassist, I think I would tire of playing 12-bar bass lines. Okay, I'd like to amend my answer. I think still Steely Dan, but I would really need to just strap in and keep up. If you could be a session musician on any one album, which would it be and why? I'll take this one. Back to the Night by Joan Armatrading. Back to the night. Back to the night. Because the band sounds like they are having the best time. Even if you can't see them, it's really coming through in the recording. I went to see her play maybe like 10 years ago. She came to New Zealand, and I'm pretty sure she was playing with mostly the same band that she was performing with in the 1970s. So it seems they also had great rapport. If you could have a face-to-face meeting with any musician and get to chat and play with them for, say, an hour, who would be your top choice? I thought about this one for a while, and I think Joni Mitchell. Because I would love to know what it felt like to outshine her peers without getting any of the kind of recognition that they were getting. Like, was she experiencing some serious imposter syndrome, or just like righteous indignation? Ooh, but if it's like a tea party kind of situation, Dolly Parton and Ella Fitzgerald, because I think they've seen some stuff and they seem like really, really nice people. Ella's actually dead. Shh. Who do you think most consistently served lukes throughout their careers? I got this one. What, again? Yeah, I'm the cool one. I'm the most sartorially qualified. There are far too many fashion icons to enumerate in full, so here is a quick fire list. Little Richard, Mick Jagger, Stevie Nicks, Tina Turner, Patti Smith, James Brown, Celia Cruz, 80s era Anthony Kiedis and Flea, Elton John, David Bowie, Betty Davis, Miles Davis, Andre 3000, Cab Calloway, St. Vincent, and a personal favorite of mine, Josephine Baker. What band or artist would you love to see live? Doesn't matter if they have left this humble earth. My turn. So initially my thought was XTC, but then I remembered that the lead singer Andy Partridge had like terrible stage fright, and the knowledge that he wouldn't really be enjoying himself I think would take the buzz out of the gig. So I think actually my answer is Jellyfish, because their lead singer was also a drummer, and so when they performed he would play the stand-up kit. Which sounds amazing, right, drum correspondent? Oh. Now here are some questions about music in general. Which artists or groups do you think had the most profound influence on the trajectory of music in the 70s? I sort of see the early to mid 70s as a kind of carryover period from the 60s, which were in and of themselves a massively transitional period for music. Out of 60s soul and Motown, you've got 70s soul and 70s funk and even disco.
Papa was a rolling stone.
60s psychedelia kind of evolved into stadium rock, and a lot of the big players in the 70s were actually, again, holdovers from the 60s. So like the Stones, or Led Zeppelin. Given that, I think we're going to find the answer in artists who really changed the game in the 70s. In which case I would have to name either the Ramones
1, 2, 3, 4.
or the Sex Pistols.
God save the Queen, the fascist regime.
Because I feel like they looked at everything that was out there in terms of like the excess and the hedonism of these big rock and roll acts, and their tens of thousands of people who would come and see them in these giant stadiums and show off their technical prowess and wield their guitars like some sort of a magic staff. And I think they went, nah, we're gonna play small clubs and we don't know how to play our instruments. We're not doing anything technical. We're gonna play really badly. And that's fine. As I said, I think that really changed the game, and you can see a through line from late 70s punk through to modern rock music. If you were to ask someone what the ethos of rock is, I think a lot of people would say it's this sort of like snarky, anti-establishment, disaffected, and while you could argue that that obviously existed in the 60s and early 70s, punk really made it their brand. And I believe that it's because of that that rock continues to have that brand to this day. I think without punk there are very few subgenres of rock music that would exist today. You can still hear the ghosts of the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, I would argue, in modern rock music. The other one that I'd have to mention would be the Sugar Hill Gang, who put out Rapper's Delight in 1979.
I said the hip hop, the hip me to the hip hop, you don't stop the rock and do the.
Although it did draw from previous musical traditions, releasing a rap song that performed relatively well on the charts was a game changer, and today hip-hop music dominates the charts. What are some recent technological advances that have made the biggest differences in the music industry? I'll let editor Nancy have this one. I've had my hand up for ages. Yeah, but I'm the one who works with the tech. I'm gonna say the digital audio workstation, because it took something that was cost prohibitive to the point of being basically impossible for most bands and made it effectively free and readily accessible to the layperson. That, along with illegal downloading, took a lot of power out of the big labels, which in turn changed the industry landscape. It definitely comes with its pros and cons. For example, a benefit of having access to the digital audio workstation is that music is not being gatekept by large companies. A con is that because everyone has access to this technology, the market is flooded with music, that paradoxically makes it very difficult to find new music or to pay attention to new music long enough for it to become sort of embedded in your brain, your life, your soul. Prior to having access to just about all music ever released ever, anywhere, you'd buy an album and then you would listen to that album a lot because that was the album that you have. Now, you could never hear the same song twice if that's what you wanted to do, but it means that you can never form an emotional connection to that music. I would call that a big con. I just want to cut in. I'm still talking. I know, but I don't want to forget what I was going to say. As an example, all of our music was recorded at home, so we released it on streaming platforms and it gets somewhere around 30 listens a month on Spotify. If we had not had access to a digital audio workstation, there would be no listens on Spotify. But at the same time, there are so many people who are doing the same thing that we're doing that it's nearly impossible that we're going to be able to compete with the likes of these bigger acts. So, on the one hand, 30 streams a month is a miracle. On the other hand, it is a piddly dribble. And because of the way that music is remunerated now, especially in the age of streaming, after 2 years, we received our first $10 in royalties from several thousand streams across platforms. Go us. Our accountant advised us not to spend it all at once. Now, what were you saying? I don't know. I've forgotten. Who is currently making music that will be enjoyed for years to come? Let's hear from the piano correspondent. Yay! Okay, this is a really difficult one to answer because the music industry is a very different animal from what it used to be. So while there are still big players, we don't really have broad audiences of people listening to the same music in the same place, for instance, radio. It exists, but people aren't listening to it as widely as they used to be. The industry has sort of fractured and broken up into these micro markets and micro niches of people who listen to them. Having said that, of the big players in the game, artists like Beyonce and Taylor Swift seem to be finding success in putting out albums that have accompanying movies and then these dazzling live spectacles that are designed to take the concert-going experience to the next level and make it something even more immersive, even more emotionally charged.
Reality holds no power or control of my state of mind on my voyage.
We're about to go on a little adventure together, and that adventure is going to span 17 years of music.
They seem to do well with that. Do you think that albums present a fuller emotional personality to the artist than streaming their songs arbitrarily? Tricky. Generally, I think so, and I have a preference for releasing projects of music like albums or EPs over lots and lots of little singles, which a lot of artists do. But the reality is that people listen to music differently now than they used to. So for example, when we released our first album, we sequenced it such that the order of the tracks sort of illustrates its own narrative. However, don't tell the others, I think that the back half of the album is the stronger half, but because people only listen to streams and don't really have time to listen to full albums in their day, those are the tracks that are actually least listened to on the album. People will start the album, get about halfway through, and then presumably have something else that they have to go and do. So a lot of those tracks that I think are the best ones on the album aren't being listened to as much as the ones at the beginning. Partly as a consequence of this, we decided to release the second album in 2 parts. And that means that people only have to listen to 5 songs at a time. Ideally, people would have the time to listen to the entire thing and understand it as a discrete unit, as opposed to a collection of songs. Realistically, that's just not how people consume music now. Generally. Do you know of any rock or pop musicians who got better with age? This person has continued, "'Cause I don't. They flourish and peak before 30. That's the age when most classical composers get really interesting. It's like 2 different creative species." I suspect that the idea that people lose their creative value as they get older is in part supported by an industry that is trying to sell music to young people who don't necessarily want to listen to songs about menopause and colonoscopies, although both are important topics. As I was saying about the nature of streaming, it's created all of these sort of micro markets, these micro niches of music. I think that allows a lot of artists to stay in the game longer than they would if they were trying to make the radio circuit, for instance. There are artists like Janelle Monáe,
Pink behind all of the doors, crazy,
and Chris Thiele,
Sing ho for the gathering, took for granted.
Lake Street Dive,
I'm down on the ground.
who are in their late 30s and early 40s and putting out a solidly high caliber of music, but to their own hyper-specific audiences. I'd like to add to that a lot of musicians drop out of the game as they get older. So like, we've all played in bands since we were like 16 years old, and over time we've watched our bandmates fall away as they take on demanding jobs or start families. A lot of those things are not conducive to being in a band. So that's also a consideration. A lot of people just stop making music as they get older. I was listening to an interview that Rolling Stone did with Alanis Morissette, and she said that she does most of her songwriting at like 1 or 2 in the morning because it's the only time that her house is quiet. With all due respect to Alanis Morissette, I would argue that that makes it difficult to do your best work. Maybe it's different in classical music because the industry isn't trying to pander as much to a youth audience. It doesn't matter if you're not as hot as you used to be because your label isn't trying to get your YouTube video to blow up among the youths. But also it might be because for classical musicians, the musical goalposts aren't sort of shifting quite as quickly around them as they are for pop music, which morphs and transitions really dramatically over short spaces of time. That's it from us today, but if you enjoyed this, there's a whole other episode on the way. If you'd like to support any of the weird things that we do, I'll leave a link in the description for our Buy Me a Coffee page. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you here next week. Have a great weekend!